Hey there, and welcome. Today, we're going to peel back the layers on a question that sounds super simple, but is actually, well, it's pretty complex. And that question is, what does something really cost to make? All right, let's get into it.
So, let's take a look at this shirt. You see them everywhere, right? We buy them, we wear them, we know the price on the tag, but trust me, that is not the whole story. The price is just what we pay. The cost, that's what it takes to bring it into existence.
So what is that number? What is the true all-in cost for just one shirt way before it ever lands in a store? To figure that out, we need to go on a little journey, and for that journey, we're going to need a special kind of map.
And our map for this whole thing is a tool that businesses use all the time. It's the key to unpacking the real cost of any single item by breaking it down into all its little pieces.
It's called a cost sheet. And honestly, the best way to think about it is like a recipe. It lists every single ingredient, every little step, and every single cost that goes into making that one final product. It's basically the product's financial DNA.
So how do we actually build this recipe? Well, let's break down the anatomy of a cost sheet and put together the cost of our shirt, piece by piece.
A product's life begins as just raw materials, like these rolls of fabric. From there, it moves through different stages, like hitting the factory floor, where it's cut and stitched and put together. And at every single one of these stages, costs are adding up, and our cost sheet is there to track every last cent.
Building up that total cost is a step-by-step process. We follow 4 key steps, and each one just adds a new layer of costs right on top of the last one. We're going to start with the most basic, direct expenses first.
Step 1 is all about finding the prime cost. This is the absolute core, the foundation. It's the cost of the actual fabric for the shirt, it's the wages for the person physically sewing it, and any other expense that you can point to and say, yep, that went directly into making this shirt. It's the non-negotiable starting point cost.
Okay, so check this out. This table really shows you how it all stacks up piece by piece. We start with our prime cost of $17.50. Then we add on the $200 in works overheads, which gets us to a factory cost of $19.50. But we're not done. Next, we layer on $5.50 for office and admin expenses. Now we're at the cost of production, $2,500. And finally, we add that last $300 for selling and admin, and there it is, our total cost of sales, $2,800. See how it just builds on itself?
Now, did you see those overheads we just added? Direct costs, like fabric, they're pretty straightforward. But what about all the indirect, kind of hidden costs? This, my friends, is where costing gets really, really interesting and a little tricky.
So, overheads are all those essential costs of just doing business that aren't tied to one single item. We're talking about the factory's rent, the marketing team's salaries, the electricity bill, stuff like that. These costs are absolutely real, but they support making thousands of shirts, not just our one.
And that brings us to the big challenge, right? How in the world do you take that massive monthly rent check for the factory and assign a fair, tiny little slice of it to the cost of this one shirt? It feels kind of like trying to divide up a cloud.
Well, businesses actually have a few different ways to solve this puzzle. They're called overhead absorption methods. You can think of them as different ways to slice up that overhead pie. If your business is really hands-on, you might base it on labor costs. If you run a super automated factory with tons of machines, basing it on machine hours just makes more sense. Each method tries to find the most logical way to do it.
But you might be thinking, does the method you choose really matter that much?
Oh yeah, it matters a lot.
Let's look at some numbers from an actual production job to see just how big of a difference it can make.
Okay, this is fascinating. Get this. The chart shows the overhead for the exact same job, just calculated with 3 different methods. If you base it on material cost, you get over 4,100 euros. Based on labor cost, almost the same. But look what happens when you use machine hours. Whoa, the overhead cost drops all the way down to 1,500 euros. So for a job that ran on a machine for a short time, that machine hour method probably gives you a much truer picture of the resources it actually used. Same job, same factory, but a completely different cost.
And that's the bottom line here. Choosing an overhead method isn't just some tiny accounting detail, no way. It fundamentally changes the calculated cost of a product, and that, in turn, affects its price, how profitable it seems, and all the big business decisions that get made about it.
Of course, a lot of these overhead calculations are based on estimates, right? They're forecasts made at the start of the year. But we all know real life is messy and estimates are almost never perfect. So what happens when you get to the end of the year and, whoops, your numbers don't match up?
Well, you end up in one of two spots.
Under-absorption means you didn't assign enough overhead costs to your products, so your products look cheaper to make than they really were. And over-absorption is just the opposite. You assign too much cost, making your products seem more expensive to produce than they actually were.
Let's look at a real-world case. Imagine a company realizes it has underabsorbed its overheads by 60,640 euros. That is a pretty big shortfall that you have to account for. You can't just pretend it didn't happen.
So what's the fix? Well, one logical way is to spread that 60,000 euro difference across all the places that original wrong estimate was used. So as you can see here, a piece of it gets added to the value of products still being made, another piece gets added to finished goods sitting in the warehouse, and the biggest chunk gets added to the cost of goods that have already been sold. It's basically a way of going back and correcting the books to match reality.
Which brings us right back to the big picture. Why go through all this trouble? Well, because understanding your true unit cost is everything. It lets you set a selling price that's actually profitable. It helps you track how efficient you are over time, and most importantly, it gives you the real information you need to make smart decisions, like which products to push and which ones to maybe stop making.
So the next time you pick up a simple shirt or your morning coffee or really anything, maybe you'll have a new appreciation for that complex recipe of costs, both the obvious ones and the hidden ones that had to come together to create it. So I gotta ask, what everyday item will you never see the same way again?